do if I can answer them all, though.
So I guess I'll start since I've actually got a question. So I've actually heard a couple times the reason why Pliny the Elder actually uses like carapils and dextrose is because your mash tun initially wasn't large enough to supply all the malt you would actually need to produce an 80% beer. Is there any validity to that? And is that the reason why everyone keeps throwing carapils into their beers?
Yeah, and interestingly, that is true. But interestingly, we actually haven't used carapils in Pliny in probably 3 years now, roughly. 2 years for sure, because when hop creep started getting really bad, that was one of the catalysts that we and other brewers have figured out that was causing the some of the extended fermentation. Does everyone on the call know what hop creep is?
We might debate it if it exists or not, but
go on and explain it for the people in the room that don't know what it is.
Yeah. So hop creep is this phenomenon that actually started, or at first was discovered back in the late 1800s by some English brewers, and they saw some secondary fermentation happening in the cask, and it was producing more CO2, but it was also creating some diacetyl, and which at the time no one cared about here, and back then they called it the freshening power of hops because it really freshened up and livened the beer. So fast forward to 5 years ago, and I get a call from Jason Perkins at Allagash, and he says, "Hey, do you ever get like secondary fermentation after dry hopping, or diacetyl, whatever he said?" And I said, "Yeah, we sometimes do, but I don't know what it's from." And we weren't in the position to do any of the research, but Jason went to OSU to Tom Shellhammer, and they started researching it, and basically that led them to also find this old paper from the 1800s that talked about it. And so the modern term is hop creep. Basically what it is you have a secondary fermentation on beers that are dry hopped, heavily dry hop beers, so more than a pound per barrel, and it gets worse and worse the more hops you add. So like a super big hazy or juicy IPA that's got 3, 4, 5, 6 pounds of hops per barrel, of dry hops per barrel, you're going to get it worse. And the reason why is that OSU, Oregon State University, discovered that there are enzymes in hops. And so these are the exact same enzymes that are in that they're in your malt. And so what happens is you finish your fermentation, you do your diacetyl rest, and then you add your dry hops to your IPA or pale ale, your heavily dry hop beer, whatever it is. And typically it's with American hops. And after about a day or so, you start seeing a secondary fermentation. So you can actually see the sugar initially going up, and then eventually it starts dropping because the yeast in the beer starts to re-ferment, and then it's creating a second diacetyl hit. And this can take up to 15 days to get rid of. And we had hop creep really bad. And so the first thing to look at is yeast, and then the second is zinc or any yeast nutrient. And that's the first way to really clean it up. But anyways, along to get back to the question of the carapils, one of the things that brewers have figured out is to get rid of the carapils out of your recipe, because those long chain sugars that the carapils is adding to your beer, yes, they're adding body and mouthfeel, but they're also adding these unfermentable sugars that are getting broken down by the enzymes from the hops. And why it only came to be in the last 5 years, we speculate, is because the hop industry, by the direction of the craft beer industry, dropped their kiln temperature down to, on average, 125 to 130. where 5 years and beyond, there was probably only 2 or 3 farms up in the Northwest that were kilning at 125, 130. Everyone else was at 145 or 150. And so they were denaturing the enzymes. If you guys want to learn even more about hop creep, I just took part in a 4-person, or maybe it was a 5-person panel for the virtual Craft Brewers Conference, and all that stuff is online for free. I think if you just go to craftbrewerconference.com or whatever the name is, or .org, it now goes right to the virtual page. And I just did it yesterday, or maybe it was 2 days ago, and they filmed it and recorded it, and it's up and it's for free. So it's really interesting. There's someone from Freem up in Oregon that did a lot of work. Max is a lead lab guy there. Adam from Creature Comforts out in Athens, Georgia, talks about zinc and yeast nutrient. Tom Shellhammer's on from OSU. There's a gentleman from Australia. They're actually pasteurizing their beer, and that's killing the enzymatic reaction. And then I talk about some experiments that we've done where we've actually gone back to higher kiln temperatures. So we worked with some of our growers and went back to 145 and then used those 145 dry hops, or in a dry hop for Pliny. And we did reduce the hop creep pretty significantly. So if any of you are seeing diacetyl after your IPAs age out beyond a week or two, that's probably why it's happening. It's probably not Pediococcus, which is what your first thought would be, that you have a contamination, but it's this hop creep thing that we're all trying to figure out. At one point, Pliny was taking us 30 days to make. So we built this brewery that could, make 50,000, 60,000 barrels, whatever, and we were running it at a capacity of like 30,000 barrels. It was like we were lagering every beer we made.
So you kind of brought up an interesting point there of like the different kindling temperatures. By any chance, do you use different, like, this is going to be like really, I guess, specific, but is there any chance of like using a lower kindled hop in the like late boil? That way, you're going to denature, but you're also going to save anything that came from the kindling at a lower temperature, and then use the higher kindled for dry hopping?
Yeah, those experiments that we did, that's exactly what I did, because I also didn't want to use up all the high kiln hops, because quite honestly, probably doesn't matter in the kettle. What's really interesting is three things. Are you familiar with cryo from Yakima Chief? It's basically a type 45 pellet. So type 90 pellet is your normal pellet that you use 99% of the time. Type 45, or sometimes you see type 35, is just basically the pellet concentrated, and you have less green matter, and it's the green matter in the bract material specifically where the enzymes reside. And yep, there you go.
Not sure if you see that or not, but yeah, there you go.
Up, yep. And so using cryo is the best way that I know to reduce hop creep right now. We make a beer called Row 2 Hill 56, which is an all Simcoe beer. And that Simcoe is one of the worst offenders for hop creep, Simcoe and Amarillo. Seems like these New World hops have more hop creep. And it was taking us 15 days to clear the diacetyl after the dry hop, or during the dry hop for Row 2. When we went to cryo, we cut that down to like an 8 or 9 day dry hop. It's still not as good as it used to be, which used to be a 4-day dry hop, but at least we're back to something, manageable. The second point I was going to make was Pat Smith from Tributary and Loftus Farms. Loftus is owned by the Smiths, and them, along with Peralt and Carpenter, own Simcoe, and they own a part of Citra, Mosaic. Pat did an interesting kiln where he what I coined the term flash kiln, where all the hops were in the kill bed. He brought the temperature up, the air temperature up immediately to 155, and then held them there for 5 minutes to try to denature the enzymes there. And then he brought it back down to 130. and to carry out the rest of the kiln run. And so he only did a little bit of that, and he did it with Citra. We're going to do a lot more experiments with that because that shaved a couple days off our dry hop too. So that something that worked. And then my third point was going to be, at the end of the day, you know, taking the kiln temperature back up doesn't do you any good if the beer tastes like crap. But it also should be understood that 10 years ago, every hop was kilned at 145. So we know you can make beer that way. And in all of our tasting panels internally, well, I'll start with a well-known hop expert and a flavor chemist picked the high temperature over the low kiln temperature. The OSU tasting panel was split. They liked them equal. At Russian River, we did 3 formal tastings. 2 of them, one of them, it was even. It was 33% like the high kiln, 33% like the low kiln, and 33% couldn't tell a difference. Then we did it again with just trained, and with just trained panel, it was like 80% like the high kiln over the low kiln. And then I did it 3 or 4 more times on my own, and I was split. For me personally, when the beer was young, I liked the high kiln, but as it aged out, some of the nice fruity notes dropped out faster. So it seems like if you make a beer that sells really fast like we do, you're probably okay going with a high kiln hop to try to reduce some of the hop creep. But if your beer is going to sit around a long time, those hop notes were nicer with the low kiln hops as it aged out more. But as a brewer, you can't just ask for a high kiln hop and then go in and select a low kiln. You have to commit to it. So for us, the way that we did it was, I've worked with these growers for so many years that they know exactly what kind of Simcoe, Centennial, Cascade, Amarillo. The growers know what I want. And so I can trust them. And a lot of times they'll pick 2 lots for me, and I'd be like, either one, doesn't matter. They're both great.
Awesome,
Thanks,
thanks.
Vinnie. I got a question. I've been reading recently about the PH1 barrel and its transition from all these breweries. Pretty interesting story. I'm not sure everybody knows about it, but if you might talk about it a little bit, and what beers did you make with the PH1 that we might have tried?
Yeah. And did I see someone drinking a Rare Barrel? I just saw someone with a bottle. Is that Kevin?
Oh yeah, it's me.
So Rare Barrel ties into this story. So real quick, many years ago, probably in 2004, 2005. Keep in mind, there was almost no one making funky barrel-aged beers in America. There was New Belgium. There was Tommy at before it was Lost Abbey. It was Pizza Port, myself, Dan Carey, New Glarus. Not too many more. A few others, of course. And Peter at New Belgium had offered to give Tommy and I 20 used Lafayette barrels. Well, in the end, he only shipped us 4 because a bunch of the New Belgium employees wanted the old barrels for planters. Anyways, that was that. I sent 2 off to Tommy. I kept 2. One of the 2 that I kept ended up being PH1. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't even know what it meant. PH1 was written on the head of the barrel, but I didn't know what it meant. And then a couple years later, Lauren Salazar, who runs the barrel program at New Belgium, was visiting us, and she says, "Oh, hey, can I see our old barrels?" So I took her into the barrel room, and there was the 2 barrels sitting there. And she starts, like, at the same time, she's crying and cursing at the same time, because she's crying because PH1 is still alive. She thought that it had gotten cut up and got given to one of the employees. And she's cursing Peter out for giving it away, for giving PH1 away. So anyways, that started the life of PH1. It went from New Belgium to us. And then we had it for years, and we made beatification in it. So the first time we made beatification, it was not a spontaneous fermented beer like it is now. And so we actually took the 2 barrels of beatification, both were the New Belgium barrels, and one we labeled batch 1 PH1, and one was just batch 1. And the PH1 I took on the label, like if you all know the Pliny, and where there's all the verbiage that goes around the label. We did the same thing here, where I told the story of Lauren coming and seeing the barrels. So we kept using it then started using it for spontaneous beers for many years. And then I thought it'd be cool to give it back to New Belgium. So I surprised Lauren and shipped it back to New Belgium to our distributor, and then our distributor delivered it. And then Lauren was becoming friends with the guys that started Rare Barrel. And Rare Barrel, the name Rare Barrel is actually from PH1. It was named after the rarest barrel in the craft beer industry is PH1.
Wow.
So that's the connection when I saw Kevin with the bottle of Rare Barrel. So there's a direct correlation. So then the barrel went from New Belgium to the Rare Barrel, and they had it for quite some time. And then they shipped it to Peter Buchart, who has now left New Belgium, and he has it at his brewery in Fort Collins Purpose. And incidentally, a few years ago, Lauren actually found PH2. So now PH1 and PH2 are reunited on a barrel rack at Purpose. And so I hope to see the barrel continue to move around from brewery to brewery. You know, I'd love to see it end up at like Crooked Stave, Lost Abbey, Alleygash, Hill Farmstead, you know, a lot of the heavy hitters in the barrel aged beer world. You know, Side Project would be cool. I have to say PH1's in pretty rough shape though. Last time I saw her, but she still holds liquid, and it's a really cool story. If any of you have ever seen the Samuel L. Jackson movie, The Red Violin, it's a really cool movie about this violin. It's not a true story, but the movie follows the life of this violin, the red violin. And it's about as wholesome as you can get with a Sam Jackson movie, but it's really cool. It's a great movie, and this is very similar to that.
Well, maybe one day we'll end up in the Smithsonian. You know?
Yeah.
Saying this reminds me of like daisy chain, but with a barrel instead of yeast.
Yeah, and it's cool too because you pick up, you know, each brewery that gets it after you pick up their bugs that was in it. So because the one thing that we know about barrel aged beers is that the bacteria and yeast can impregnate the wood up to a quarter, even a third of an inch. So and a really easy way to figure this out, and this is one of the ways I figured out. I took a red wine barrel from one of our winery partners and cut it in half, and then looked at it side view, and you can see how deep the red wine gets into the wood. And so there's no reason why the Brett and bacteria can't get there either.
That's an awesome story.
Well, it sounds like you have the makings of a book.
Maybe.
Hey,
We've been hit up by a publisher, but it was before we built the new brewery. So
Got the stories, but not the time.
yeah.
I really wonder just how much money there actually is in writing a book about brewing. It's already a very limited audience. I don't know if Vinnie would know or if anyone else in this chat would know, but what is writing a homebrew book look like?
Jamil, I think you might be able to answer that question.
Hey, Jamil's on. Hey.
Hey.
You know what? That
was a good segue to introduce him too.
I wouldn't write a book on home brewing or brewing at this point. There's too much. There's too many out there, and there's too many great podcasts now between like master brewers and even craft beer and brewings. Their podcasts can be pretty educational. With a lot of the young and up and coming brewers. That's one of the reasons I love listening to the craft beer and brewing podcast, because I hear from all these brewers I've never even heard of. Learn what they're doing and their techniques and whatnot. So are all of you familiar with the Master Brewers Association of the Americas?
Mm-hmm.
It's a 150-year-old technical organization. It's like, the one time you'll see Bud Coors and Miller Brewers hanging out together, and they have a podcast that comes out weekly, one of their, John Bryce, who's a brewer at a little brewery in Virginia, does the hosting, and it's super educational, super technical. I look forward to it every week, and everything's archived. There's some amazing presentations on there from some of the smartest people in the beer industry worldwide.
Yeah, it's great. So, Vinnie, I could ask you 1,000 questions about sour beers, but I think probably more interesting even than that is about, could you talk a little bit about STS pills and maybe specifically the open fermentation aspects that you may or may not?
Yeah, I was wavering between drinking an STS now for my shift beer.
Yeah.
I ended up going with this beer Janami, which is a Britannomyces Finnish saison that's kind of a new beer that we just came out with. That's if any of you have read much about me, you know how much I love Orval, and so we now make multiple Brett Finnish beers. But anyways, yeah. So STS, and we now make a really super classic Helles as well, called Velvet Glow. That where STS is a 40 BU Pilsner, and we dry hop it. So it's not super classic, but it still definitely holds a lot of the classic flavors. And when we built the brewery here, we knew we were going to go with a German brew house manufacturer, and it's nothing against the American and the North American companies that make brewing equipment, but the Germans do it better, and they make better tanks, they make better brewing equipment. One of the things that we wanted from our brew house, not just for our lagers, but for every beer, was to lower the what's called the TBI index. It's Thai Burl Barbituric Index. Say that 10 times over, even twice. Anyways, that's why they shorten it to TBI. TBI is basically like pre-oxidation to your wort that is from heat stress, is the simplest way to put it. It's more detailed than that, but I mean, it can start in the malting process. It can happen in the mash tun, but most of the TBI, the high TBI, happens on the kettle. And what the Germans give you is basically a boil that is programmable. And so they have a normal boil, and then they simmer, and they simmer at 205, and it's programmed in such that you start out with a hard boil, then it actually goes down to a simmer for a good part of the boil, and then the last 30 minutes it's a hard boil again to blow off the DMS, because you wouldn't want to hard boil early, blow off the DMS, and then go simmer, and maybe it reabsorbs in. But anyway, so by reducing the temperature in the boil for a portion of the kettle boil, we reduce the TBI. That gives us less of the heat thermal stress on the wort, and that just in the end really gives us better flavor and aroma. So for the lagers, it just makes a delicate beer even more flavorful and even more finesse. For a hoppy beer, it just helps with shelf and flavor stability, which, as we all know, IPAs are just notorious for not holding their shelf stability, even if you keep them cold all the time. As a home brewer, you don't have as big of this isn't as big of a problem because you're not boiling at such high pressure. But we saw our shelf stability. We added 8 weeks to our shelf life of our beer, of our hoppy beers. So then the next part of the process was the open top fermenters that we wanted to have in the brewery. And we were making, the STS pills before at our brew pub. And quite honestly, I thought it tasted pretty good there. And then I had it from the new brewery, and then we did a side-by-side and did, like the old school Pepsi challenge with the Santa Rosa STS and the Windsor STS. And we've not made STS or Velvet Glow since at the pub, because the beer is just so much better, not only on the brew house but also because of the open top fermenters. And the open top fermenting is really easy for home brewers to mimic. And it doesn't, you don't have to have an open vessel that we have. Like the classic design of an open top fermenter is that they're a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that they're as wide as they are tall. Mm-hmm. Even like the most simple homebrew setup, where you're just using a carboy. You know, a carboy is probably I'm going to say a 1-to-2 ratio. It's probably 1 times wide by 2 times tall. Most breweries have tanks that are a 1-to-3 ratio. Our fermenters here, our closed top fermenters, are about a 1-to-2.5, 2.6. But the open top fermenters are 1-to-1, meaning they're as wide as they are tall. And so by having, and as a home brewer, you could accomplish that same thing by just half filling your carboy. And then once fermentation starts, you could take the airlock off and then just put a piece of cheesecloth in so that the CO2 could escape, but no bugs or anything could get in. And with that much CO2 blowing off, yes, you may be susceptible to some contamination, but during the heavy fermentation, there's so much CO2 blowing off, there's probably not much risk. As a home brewer, you'd probably want to stick the bung back in maybe a couple days before fermentation is done. But what you get from open top fermentation is much healthier yeast for one. And then also you get a much cleaner flavor profile. Because if you think about all of the fermentation byproduct aromas and flavors that are created by fermentation, those can much more easily be blown off in an open top fermenter, not only because there's no lid, but also because there's so much surface area. And because there's so much surface area, because of that 1-to-1 ratio, it's a much shallower wort depth. And so as the CO2 is scrubbing out these byproducts, you actually have less distance that it has to travel through so it can escape more easily, to put it in kind of simple terms. And days, all beer was made in open top fermenters, and it was only, you know, in modern brewing times that they switched to closed top fermenters for simplicity. Our open top fermenters have a ring that go around the lip on the top. That's a CIP ring, and so we can CIP these tanks pretty easily. And then they also have these holes in the side that have a little slide down to a yeast collector that's set into the floor, so we can naturally top crop our beers and get that yeast off the top. It just goes down the slide into the yeast collector. And then underneath our 6 open top fermenters and 6 yeast collectors is 1 open cellar, but up top there's 2 open top fermenters per room. So we have 3 rooms, but the cellar is 1. So it makes it easy for the brewers to work in. And then each of these rooms is climate controlled. It's 100% HEPA filtered air, and it's all 100% one-way air. And then just after the air goes through the HEPA filter, it then goes through a UV lamp right before it enters the room. So the air is ultra purified. It's a totally stupid way to spend money and build tanks into a brewery. Our brew house is a 75 barrel brew house, meaning we get 75 barrels of cold wort off of every batch. And so all of our tanks are in 75 barrel increments. So we have single, double, and quadruple batch tanks. Of our 6 open top fermenters, that accounts for 10 batches of beer. In that square footage of space, I think I figured out once that we could put enough fermenters in to make 24 batches worth of fermentation space in closed top fermenters. And it probably cost us almost the same amount of money, because these tanks are pretty expensive to make, even though there's no lid or anything on them. And the rooms are really expensive because of all that HVAC and whatnot. But they make beautiful beer, and it'd be a really cool trial as a homebrew club to do some, the same recipe, fermented open top and closed top. And you'd have to get creative how you can do an open top, but the way that I just spelled it out would probably work.
Fine if I have to.
Yeah. when we've
Just want
done
to point out, I have those big fat buckets that I brew in that all of you make fun of me for. Who's laughing now?
Yeah. The other unique thing is more to tie in back to the STS. I definitely can taste the difference more on lighter, like lager beers, pale lagers. I definitely taste the difference on our Belgian beers. We use them for IPAs, and I tend to like it I tend to like the IPAs better when they are open top fermented, but they're not it's not near as obvious. So when we use them to make some IPAs, we're using them more just because it's tank capacity and it's about the flavor nuances that we get. The flavor nuances really show themselves more on a lager. But the other place where it's really great is Belgian beers. If you think about, and even more, when you drill down even more so, I'd say Saisons, yeast that want to ferment really warm. And one of the beauties of an open top fermenter is that it can dissipate the heat so much more easily, because as the CO2 is scrubbing off the byproducts, the heat is blowing off. We have all that surface area. You also have no lid on the tank to suppress the heat or suppress the pressure. Even a regular cylindrical tank that you see at a brewery, and like Jamil would know this, when you unhook the hose, it goes into the CO2 blow-off bucket. And when you're in high Kreuzen, you still have about 3 to 5 seconds of CO2 exhausting out that you can feel on that 1.5 or 2 inch sidearm. And so it's rough math is that every 6 feet creates 1 PSI of pressure. So if you think about those super massive tall tanks that, you see at big craft breweries or, big industrial lager breweries, that's a lot of back pressure that's being put on the yeast inside the tank. And so that's usually overlooked. But I love what an open top fermenter has done to our Belgian beers. It's made every one of them better. And to be quite honest with you, it's hard for me to find beers that I want to make at our brew pub in Santa Rosa. I mean, there's beers we have to make Pliny Blind Pig there because we sell so much, and Happy Hops are 3 IPAs. What's interesting is that when we do side-by-side panels, basically preference tests, almost always Windsor wins on almost every beer. But where Windsor doesn't win and Santa Rosa always wins is on Hazy IPA. Hazy IPA always tastes better on the old school, older brew house. And I'm sure it's because it doesn't make as clean of wort. It's leaving a lot more of the proteins behind. And we're just getting much better flavor. We also hold the haze better on our brewery in Santa Rosa, which is just a little 20-barrel brewery that I bought used from a defunct brewery in North Carolina in 2003. And then in Windsor, we have this hot rod of a brew house that makes just ultra clean beer.
It's the German curse, too clean.
That's the opposite theory of spunding, right?
That was something that Flores, my technical consultant, warned me of. He goes, sometimes these brew houses make too clean a beer. And he was
gonna have to dry hop with flour or something. I don't know.
Well, going back to that original question about Pliny and why we use carapils, well, we took it out because of the hop creep, but one of the problems we're having with the new brewery is that we have a wet mill here. So the malt, most craft breweries mill their grain, and then they have the milled grain in the grist case, which then augers to your mash tun. Here, our grist case is on top of our mill, so it's whole kernel malt in the grist case, and then it gets milled through this wet mill. So the grain gets hydrated with 50% of the mash water before it goes into so there's a steeping chamber. There's 2 steeping chambers. So the first steeping chamber moistens the malt with 50% of the mash water before it goes into the rollers, and then it goes through the rollers, and then the other 50% of the mash water hits the malt when the grain is cracked. And what this does is by moistening the malt kernels ahead of time, it makes it a little softer and more pliable. So instead of biting into a kernel of malt and it just shatters in your mouth, this actually keeps it the husk intact. So that's one of the reasons why we end up with much cleaner beer, because our husk is more intact. And aside from the German brew house, the German wet mill is helping there. And then also all of our malt handling is from a German company called Kunzel that has all this aspiration equipment. So using air and aspiration venting, we can actually remove all the dust and husk and all the crap out of the grain before it makes it to the grist case. So pound for pound, all of our grain is actually giving us more efficiency and getting us more sugar out of it. But one of the things we saw was our beers were getting too dry. Pliny finishes normally at about 2.4 plate before we came into the new brewery, and we were mashing at like, I don't know, 152, 153 Fahrenheit. We've had to settle on 2.1 as the finishing Plato, finishing gravity, and we're mashing at like 158 because the beers were just too dry from the new brew house. And at one point, Pliny was at it was finishing at 1.2 Plato. I mean, it was getting to the point where it wasn't going to take much more to turn it into a brewed IPA.
It's kind of like Lagunitas, like we just mash everything at 160. We don't even care anymore.
Except they finish at about 10:20.
Hey, Vinny, one question on the open top. Do you see a difference with the hop characteristic? You said you see a difference with the yeast, but is there any hop differences?
You know, I can't say that there's any like big flavor difference. One thing that we've messed around with this beer, Happy Hops, which is our not so hazy IPA. But basically, before we made hazy IPAs, I wanted to prove that you could make a beer taste every bit like a hazy IPA, but was clear. I've never had any issues with hazy IPAs, and I really like the ones we make now. But it was just more of a personal challenge that you could make a beer. So we started fermenting Happy Hops in the open top fermenters at elevated temperatures, because my theory was that we ferment even warmer than we normally do. Normally we ferment our hoppy beers we knock out at 64 Fahrenheit, and then we set the tank at 68. They normally hang at 64 for 24 hours. And then at that point, it goes from 64 to 68 degrees, and then they free rise up. One of the reasons for doing that is it helps drive the pH drop harder. And with dry hopping, heavily dry hop beers tends to increase the pH. So we're always trying to lower our pH a little bit more early on to counteract that. But the thought was with Happy Hops was to ferment it at 72 or 74 Fahrenheit in the open tops, figuring we could blow off the heat, but ferment it warmer and we could create more fruity ester profile with the beer. The jury's out whether that actually works or not. We've been really focused on hop creep more than anything else. But when we do ferment Happy Hops in the open tops, there's a little more fruity note to it. I'd love to make Happy Hops both at the same time and then do a tasting in our sensory lab and do a preference test and see if people, like it. Because when we do sensory, it's not just our brewers, it's bartenders, servers, it's everyone in the company.
Cool.
Do you know off the top of your head which yeasts are in the beer you're drinking now, the Orval homage?
Yeah, so this beer is called Yanami, and it has it's kind of a cool story. During the we've made saisons before, but I never have made a real true attempt at it, and I didn't want to until we had open top fermenters. As you know, like the classic DuPont saison strain tends to putter out, at 4 Plato or something, and then you have to let it sit for weeks on end to let it finish fermenting. When you ferment the DuPont strain in our open tops, dry out completely, just like a normal fermentation. It's really interesting. So the strain, this beer, Yanami, has another beer related to it called Robert. So we brew Robert, which is a classic saison, and then we take Robert and after we centrifuge it to bottle it, we then take a portion of the Robert and send it into our funky brewery, and we bottle condition it with some Brettanomyces. So Robert and Janami are the exact same beers, but one has Brett and one doesn't. So it's really fun to do the tasting. And so this Saison strain is from a yeast lab in, I think it's Chicago. It's Omega. And it's called Saison Struts Monster or something to that effect. Let me see if I can pull it up when we're talking here.
I think it's Saison Steins.
That's it. That's Saison Stein. Now I don't have to look it up. Yeah. And Saison Stein is a hybrid yeast of French Saison. And I believe I don't know 100% sure, but I think the other Saison strain in it is the DuPont strain. And it's the most heavily diastatic yeast that we use. So for those of you that don't know what diastatic is, when you think about diastatic, the DP, diastatic power when you read a malt analysis, well, I didn't know what diastatic yeast was until 3-4 years ago. I had no idea that there was yeast that could make Brettanomyces look like a pussycat. And so basically you've got these strains of yeast. Almost every Saison strain is diastatic is positive, but then they need to have the STA1 gene, which basically breaks all the sugars down and gives you an ultra dry beer. And so when you make a Saison using a classic Saison yeast, one of the reasons why they get to be so dry is because they're diastaticus STA1 positive. And this beer gets down to 0 Plato in the bottle. So when we make either Robert or Janami, even after primary fermentation, let's say there's 0.5 degree Plato left in the beer, we need to account for that 0.5 degree Plato for the bottle conditioned sugar because it will always dry out to 0 over time. And then the Brett strain, we've jumped around. This batch is actually Bruxellensis from Y yeast. I will definitely say that you could get Brett from let's say Brett Bruxellensis because it's the most common strain. You could get that from every yeast supplier, and there would be nuanced differences between them all. And then we have another strain, multiple strains of Brett, aside from other conventional ones that you can get, Lambicus, Classini, Anomalous. We have some proprietary strains, but they're only available to us from a yeast lab over in Napa. And this lab basically works obviously mostly with wineries, and wineries will bring them their wine, and if they think they have Brett, and this lab will run their tests, and they're looking for markers, basically 4-ethyl guaiacol and 4-ethyl phenol, so 4-EP and 4-EG. 4-EP is what we would call negative or bad Brett, and that would give you the like Band-Aid or like rubber tire. I always think of like when you walk into the tire shop and you have that smell of rubber that's just everywhere. That's 4-ethyl phenol. 4-ethyl guaiacol is like nice Brett. That's going to be spicy, clove, cinnamon, jasmine, a little floral. That's really pretty Brettanomyces, and so that's what we're looking for. So we have 3 strains that are heavily 4-EG, 4-ethyl guaiacol, and we often will blend them with the Bruxellensis. So to be honest with you, this might be a blend that I'm drinking, but honestly, I can't remember. But I still really like the classic flavor of Brett Brux and I like Y yeast because back in the day, they were the only place I could get Brett from. I mean, even when White Lab started as the second yeast company for the craft beer industry, Chris and Lisa didn't want to have Brett in their in their lab.
Yeah.
It should also be noted that you can usually, you have a lot of talk these days of these hazy IPAs and having biotransformation between the yeast and the dry hops. And, I'm still not 100% certain about all that, because at some point, when you add 3 or 4 pounds of hops per barrel dry hop, of course you're going to get a super intense aroma. But anyways, the original yeast that I ever heard biotransformation talked about is Brettanomyces. So there's probably a lot of interesting home brews you could do where you dry hop with Brett, and to see if you can get some different aromas and flavors. We dry hop our Saison with just a little bit of hops. It's Salea, Tettnang, and Hallertau Mittelfrüh. And then the idea is that those hops are in the beer when we have the secondary fermentation with the Brett, and that maybe we get some unique flavors and aromas.
At what point do you do that?
Dry hop or add the Brett?
Both. I mean, is it?
Yeah, so the dry hopping super conventional on our Saisons. So, because we don't have an active fermentation when we're adding the Brett, I'm not 100% sure that we're getting biotransformation. I think that's where there's a lot of unknown and speculation with like hazy IPAs is you have to add the dry hops 2-3 days into fermentation when you have basically when you're in high Kreuzen to get the effects. But, I don't think there's been enough studies done to do a comparison of the two with a gas chromatograph to really graph it out. So for the Saison, we'll finish fermentation. Our Saisons, we interestingly treat the dry hopping a lot like STS, which we dry hop at 42 Fahrenheit. So when we make STS, we'll finish the fermentation, go through diacetyl rest, drop the temperature to 40, pull the yeast, and then drop the temperature to 42, pull the yeast that we want to use for the next batch, let it sit for a week at 42, and then dry hop it. We treat the Saison the exact same way, and then after we dry hop, and it's a really short dry hop, 2 days, 3 days, and then we get the hops off the beer, and then we'll drop the temperature immediately to 32 Fahrenheit, with the idea being that we don't want the Saison or the Pilsner to smell like an IPA. We're also using European hop cultivars that are going to be a lot more green and grassy, and they're not going to be as pretty a flavor. So the colder the colder temperature for the dry hopping for both beers tends to give us better results. And then after that, we would lager both beers for a pretty good amount of time. Because even with the Saison, and we own a centrifuge, the yeast doesn't flock that well. And so we want to get a bunch of it out just so the centrifuge performs better and we get better yields.
One thing that
I didn't add when the Brett is added. Brett gets added in the bottling tank. So we bottle condition all of our Belgian beers, all of our sour barrel aged beers. So if we want to do a Brett finished beer, we'll add the priming sugar, we'll add a fresh dose of yeast. For anything that's non-sour, we use a yeast called CBC1. It's from, I think it's a Lallemand brand yeast. And then if it's a sour beer, so beers that have a high acid level, we use a wine yeast called DV10. We've also used Rockpile in the past. You could use any dry wine yeast to bottle condition a sour beer. And anyways, it's here that we would add the Brettanomyces in. And we always shoot for 1 million cells per milliliter of yeast in our bottle conditioned beer, no matter if it's Brett finished or not. If it's Brett finished, we would then make a portion of that 1 million cells be Brettanomyces, and it's often only like 10%. It's a pretty small amount compared to the overall. Sometimes it's even less than that. Sometimes it can be as small as like 5% of the total amount of yeast pitched. If you are going to do Brett finished beers, you got to be super careful because if your beer is anywhere over, for me, it's half a degree Plato, so 1.002, and you add priming sugar on top of that, you could ultimately end up with overcarbonated beer and bottles exploding because the Brett's not going to stop fermenting. And if you couple that, if it's a Saison yeast that's STA1 positive diastaticus, that's also going to keep fermenting the beer out as well.
One question I had for you, Vinnie, and for Michael, and for anyone else that wants to weigh in. Since biotransformation was mentioned, I don't doubt that biotransformation happens. I believe that happens. However, it is a transformation of like geraniol, linalool, all that stuff. And what is to stop if I add the geraniol and linalool in my whirlpool? And, let's say I keep it below, whatever temperature. There's geraniol and linalool in there, in the beer. It's not going anywhere in the wort. It's still there through fermentation. So if biotransformation of those compounds is going to happen, why doesn't it happen during fermentation? That whole time it's active with the yeast. Why do you have to add it in the dry hopping? That makes no sense to me. I've had no real luck dry hopping during fermentation. I have better luck, I think, adding those compounds during the whirlpool and then waiting on dry hopping until fermentation is pretty much done. I don't think there's any magic there. I think the compounds are still there.
Yeah, couple things there. One is if you're a professional brewer, and 99% of all professional brewers serial pitch, so you're pulling from one tank going to the other. If you dry hop in the fermentation, say 3 days in, that yeast is done. So you use it. Also, not all yeasts are beta-glucosidase is the
right.
Is the component in the yeast that makes it biotransformation positive. What I am waiting for, maybe it's out there and I've just not seen it, is a list of all the common yeast, and has someone done a research to basically say, yes, the New England IPA yeast from Lallemand is beta-glucosidase positive, but California ale yeast from White or 1056 from White yeast, wherever, is not. That's what it'd be really interesting to see. But Jamil's point is good. And, Natalie and I have a really good friend who's a hop expert. She's got a master's in hops or PhD. And anyways, she's freaking smart and knows more about hops than I've probably forgotten and everyone else on this call. We've talked about also, you can have these oxidized hop compounds that maybe, when you do a 2-stage dry hop, that maybe you get some oxidation and, oxidation not in the bad way that we think about beer tasting like cardboard with one dry hop, or maybe you have biotransformation between geraniol and linalool or whatnot. And then you add a second set of hops on top of that, and then maybe you're getting unique flavors there. Now, with that said, we did an interesting, Tom Shellhammer at OSU was doing a study on single stage or 2-stage dry hop and doesn't make a difference. And, Pliny is famous for its 2-stage dry hop, and we've been experimenting with 1-stage dry hopping to simplify the process and also have less potential oxidation when we're adding dry hops. And so he then took our beer, since we were doing it on a full commercial scale, and studied it. And there's a paper out there on it. And although there was a slight preference towards the 2-stage dry hop, for the most part, you couldn't tell the difference between a 1-stage and a 2-stage dry hop.
What scale were those tests done on? Because I'd imagine on a larger scale that there might be a little bit of overlap as far as like the hop settling down and then not being available to the rest of the beer. Whereas in like a homebrew scale, it doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah, they were doing their work on their little 1-barrel system at OSU, where our tanks were 300 barrel, so they were 30-foot tall tanks, or however tall they are, 20, 25 feet tall, whatever. Anyways, they're crazy tall tanks. And that's one difference between making beer on a big scale and a homebrew scale is what I call when you dry hop, what I call travel time. You add the hops through the top, and when you're doing it on a big scale, there's more time for them to trickle through the beer. Whereas, on a homebrew scale, inevitably your vessel is smaller. You may be dry hopping on the same proportion as a professional brewer, but it's not going to be the same. So, like rousing your hops as a home brewer might be something where it's easy to do. You can, if it's a 5-gallon vessel, you can shake it around. Interestingly, on all of our fermenters at the new brewery in Windsor, I had a port put on the back of the cone, a 2-inch port that we can connect a mixer to. So a lot of breweries mix their tank with a pump. So it'll come out of the side of the tank, the side arm, and then through a pump and then into the bottom. So it's turning, you pump into the bottom, so then it's shooting straight up and almost creating this volcanic effect. The problem there is that you potentially are exposing your beer to oxidate, more oxygen, because if your pump has a bad seal, a bad connection, and you're running it for anywhere from 4 to 24 hours. So the idea that I had was to put a port on the back of the tank, and then the wine industry has this mixer called a Guth, and it's a retractable mixer. So on these ports, there's a ball valve, and then we have this portable Guth mixer, and it's got an impeller that opens up. And so when you push it in, so you connect it to the tank, it's clamped in and it's all sanitized. You open the ball valve, you push in the arm, and then the impeller is flat. And then once you turn the pump on, the impeller opens up and it starts spinning, and we can turn this 300-barrel tank in. So it's like 10,000 gallons of beer. We can turn the entire volume of the tank in like an hour or two. It's pretty impressive. And of these tanks have sight glasses at the top too, so we can actually look in and see. So we now mix our beers for 24 hours. One of the original reasons for doing that was to try to get the hop creep started faster, to get the hops broken down and get the enzymes working faster. One reason, going back to Jamil's question, to go back to hop creep, one reason to dry hop early, if you don't need your yeast, is that you will start that enzymatic reaction sooner, and so hop creep won't be near as bad. There's a lot of talk about how dry hopping in primary fermentation, you scrub out a lot of that nice hop aroma, and that was always my thought. And you certainly probably do, but like I know Tommy at Lost Abbey is now making a beer for their hop concept label where they're dry hopping it day one, and they're not leaving it in dry hopping later on. So, and he just, I haven't had that beer yet, but the flavors he's telling me are just absolutely phenomenal.
I had a problem with, fermentation dry hopping where, in blind side by sides, it was always far more bitter and no better hop character. So we abandoned any early dry hopping or fermentation dry hopping because of that. And then I kind of got on this jag of, well, all right, the whole reason for doing this is because you believe that the yeast are biotransforming these hops or these hop compounds because the yeast is active. It's like, well, if you put those hop compounds in early, in the whirlpool, then they haven't gone anywhere. They must get biotransformed anyways. So I don't really know any of the answers. I have a lot more questions than I have answers.
I think Vinnie hit on the point. I think Vinnie hit on the point when he said when you add the vegetation to it, the biotransformation might happen with the compounds that are already there left from the whirlpool. However, adding more vegetation on top of that and using the specific yeast, which anecdotally happens to be British yeast of some sort. Most of all the hazy IPAs use some sort of London British ale yeast that seems to increase the biotransformation theory when it comes to the manufacture of these beers. So nobody has done a study yet on what yeast give you the greatest biotransformation. But I think that you'd have to look at the recipes of the successful brewers that are making these hazy IPAs, and believe me, everybody and his cousins is making a hazy IPA, and they are not all created equal. In fact, a lot of them kind of suck. So yeah, I think you need to look at the successful ones, see what they're doing, and maybe a study should be done to see if the biotransformation happens with the residual compounds as well as the new compounds that are added with new vegetation during high Croisen. I think that's the question.
With our main hazy IPA, it's called Mind Circus. We've done it every different way. We've had random batches just fall clear. We centrifuge every batch, so we're getting rid of the bulk of the yeast, so we're focusing on the proteins. And right now we are using the New England dry yeast from Lallemand. And because we don't brew this beer enough, we're just doing one use of the dry yeast. So we've actually recently gone to dry hopping on the third day and not serial pitch because we don't need the yeast for anything else. And on the random occasion that we do back-to-back hazy beers, we won't dry hop on day 3 and we'll wait. We haven't done a side-by-side yet, and we will one of these days now that we're making more and more Mind Circus. But preference-wise, when you look at the hedonic scale from our sensory, so the hedonic scale is a accepted 1 to 9 scale for tasting, not just in the beer industry, but any food industry from a sensory standpoint. And it always scores higher when we dry hop on day 3 in primary fermentation, but we don't know anything more than that. But I would love to do it side by side where we could do a preference test with our staff. So one interesting thing to get back to what Jamil was saying was you also, where does the non-volatile hop precursors or compounds fall into all this? You'll hear there's another really good podcast on the MBA podcast. In fact, they just reran it, and it's with Tom Shellhammer and Daniel Sharp. Daniel was a former grad student there who now works at Ninkasi and is a really sharp hop guy and a nice guy all the way around. And they talk a lot about the study they did where they used basically hop extract, and I think they did it with bittering hops to try to see what stays in the beer at the end of the boil. So they didn't do any whirlpool additions or whatnot. And so there's something to be said there that you probably have some carryover with hops that have a fair amount of non-volatile precursors.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned the Lallemand because that's the one yeast I've seen that declares itself as, able to do the biotransformation of the hop compounds.
Yeah, they're and they also say that their Saison strain or one of their other strains, I can't remember. Again, it was another podcast I heard on the Master Brewers where they talk about their yeast, being beta-glucosidase positive. But no one else talks about it.
Right.
We've used the Conan yeast. We've used London 3. It seems to me that the dry New England yeast from Lallemand is probably closer to London 3. We've done a blend of the Conan and the and London 3, but we've settled on this dry yeast from Lallemand for these beers, and we're using like 30% of the grain bill or 25% of the grain bill is oats and unmalted wheat and wheat.
Wow, that's quite a bit.
That's a lot.
I've used pretty much all the yeast that anybody declares will work with making hazies. And I've even done it with 001. But even though there is not a yeast, a residual yeast component to it, or very slight residual yeast in suspension component to it, you find that certain of these yeast actually produce some compounds or ferment in a way that your proteins and your polyphenols are giving you more stable haze based on what the yeast have done. Just like, a yeast will give you more malty or more hazy or more hoppy. They'll result in a more stable haze. And I had that same problem where, a batch would be brilliantly clear, a batch would be, nice and stable hazy. It's just like, what's going on? It was just crazy.
I couldn't, I can't tell you how interesting it is. And Jamil and Mike Lee, kind of old school, professional brewers, like where, you grew up in this, or, we all grew up in this era where everyone shared and helped. And I'd say 80% of the hazy IPA brewers don't share and don't give their secrets away, or they think they're secrets. And I'm going to pull up our recipe on my other screen here.
Right.
But actually, I noticed that quite a bit too, where people are just like, "Oh yeah, we can't tell our, it's a trade secret." I'm like, come on, man, come on.
Yeah, it's really interesting where the industry has gone, where it got just so competitive.
Yeah.
And, I finally, because I couldn't figure out why we were having this randomness, and to what Jamil was saying. And so one interesting thing was I started talking to brewers that make really successful Hefeweizen and Belgian white beers. And one thing I learned was that red wheat helped with better stability, which I didn't know that. So we're at 60%. I'm just going to round numbers: 60% two-row, 20% Pilsner, 6% red wheat, 6% unmalted wheat, and 8% oats. So that's 8. So it's 23, 24%. Those numbers might not hit 100% exact because I'm rounding up. But anyways, that's where we settled. And the red wheat ended up being a game changer for us. So that was my best approach. My favorite hazy beer is Juicy Bits from Weldworks in Colorado.
I just want to say,
one of the things that we found is an extremely high protein wheat. The higher the protein, the better. So the problem with wheat is the gluten. So the higher the beta glucans, the more clear the beer will get. But the higher the protein, the better off you are. So you want to find the highest protein wheat you can. So people are making these 15, 16, 17% protein wheats. And that's one of the things. I've tried spelt, which actually helps. And but if you go too high on the oats or the wheat, it has a clearing effect, is what I found. So we're trying to stay below 20%. And then the yeasts, the various yeasts, the imperial yeast seems to be working really well for us. I mean, we've tried them all in side-by-side tanks, and it's interesting which ones work and the flavors and which ones stay stable even though the cell count's the same. One will be far more hazy than another. And
we started focusing on the particulate size of the proteins, and we found that we needed to really figure out how we can get them smaller so that they weren't big and then they settled out, or when the yeast settles out, it grabbed the big proteins to take it down to the cone of the tank. What else? We can leave hazy IPA if you guys want.
Heat load. I've got a question on heat load. This is 2 weeks in a row we've heard about the detrimental stability effect of Increase
Thermal load. Get it right.
thermal
Yeah.
load. Thank you. Can
I
you
know
guys,
what you meant.
Jamil and Mufasa,
kind of
kind of touch on that and help explain that a little bit more? Because I think we ended the last meeting on that point.
I'd be
It was
interested to know
Vinnie-
if Mufasa has anything to say on that
Thermal.
too, because he's obviously done some stuff with BJ's.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was there? Was there a question or just want me to? I
Well,
thought
just explain the process or what actually causes early staling due to the increased heat load, and what heat load are we talking about? Are we talking about kilning? Are we talking about mashing, boiling, or all of the above?
it's all the above, where your TBI goes up, and the easiest way so like when you're on a professional scale, when you have a kettle being made, you want to have the most surface area for your heating element, whether it's, steam, internal calandria, at the lowest pressure possible. So you want to have the lowest pressure possible. That's why, as a home brewer, this isn't stuff you have to worry about. It's more stuff on professional brewing. Our original production brew house was an old pub brewery system that we bought from Dogfish Head. It didn't have any steam reduction built into it. So we were boiling the wort at high pressure. And that was probably the lowest point of our beer quality. And then we put in a AAA system, which is the same brand that Jamil has. And that was a low pressure system, so 15 PSI. And we significantly reduced our TBI, but raised our shelf stability. And then going to the German brew house, it just did it even more so.
Sorry.
What is TBI? There we go.
It's Butyl Barbituric Index.
Can you say that like 3 more times fast?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, just look up beer and TBI, and there's actually some fair amount of papers on it. I have some saved, and I can dig them up and send them to Sasha. I know we have them in our brewery library in our lab folder on our server.
What's the pressure of your steam that you're using on the German system?
It's about 20 or 28. It's 1.5 bar. So
1.5 bar, because I just found that
25 PSI roughly, because a bar is 14 something or other.
14 point, yeah. But I just found that 15 wasn't good enough to get what I needed out of a boil and reduction of DMS and things like that. Do you have an active fan that pulls steam off your system?
We don't know. Interestingly, I sat through a really interesting talk years ago at Sierra Nevada. They had an internal malt technical 2-day deal, and Ken was nice enough to invite me over to sit on it. It was just Sierra Nevada employees and myself and my then production manager, and this gentleman by the name of Joe Hertrick, who's like the Michael Jordan of the malt world, was presenting, and there are several Joe Hertrick podcasts on the MBA podcasts that are worth listening to. I've listened to those things over so many times, and he talked about like the DMS and needing 30 minutes of boil time over 205 degrees. And he also talked about this brewery he worked at where there was a dead spot in the bottom of their kettle because of the way the calandria was built, that the wort, and granted he only worked for big breweries, so we're probably talking like 800 and 1,000 barrel kettles. They're like as big as most of our houses. And so you can imagine that there could be a dead spot of multiple feet under the calandria where the wort wasn't moving. And I think they probably went under, and I can't remember the exact story, but I assume they put a thermometer in from underneath. They welded in a thermometer, and they found that this one area was dead and it was never getting above 205. And that's what was causing their DMS. So having the ability to turn the whole vessel having it turn is really important on the design. And so that was something we were really focused on when we were designing the brew house. And so when you buy a brew house from a German company, they allow you to give 6 performance standards, and it's these performance standards that your last 10% of your payment is tied to. And if they don't pass these 6 standards, you end up you negotiate that last 10% of the payment. So it behooves the German company to get things right. And TBI was one of the things that I wanted on that, and they were fine with it, and they hit it. They knocked it out of the park, which is why we have much better shelf stability now than we ever had.
So do they actually test those before they actually ship it out, or do they actually have to get it all the way to your location, then test it to make sure it passes all your last 10% or whatever? Because that way it'd be like, yeah, sorry, this doesn't meet my goals at all.
Yeah, the last 10% payment is still 6 figures. It's a lot of money. You know what? They just know, like, if you brought up TBI to 99% of the North American brewhouse manufacturers, they probably wouldn't know what you were talking about. But all the German brewhouse manufacturers know what TBI is. It's something they look at. The Belgians are hyper focused on it. Hedwig Nevin from Duvel is something he is quite focused on. Jean-Marie Roch, the former brewmaster at Orval in Belgium, is something he was focused on. So that was something, and I cannot speak to the full scientific depth of what TBI is, but just the broad spectrum is what I've laid out here today.
So if you're a home brewer and you're trying to minimize your amount of heat or energy you're putting into a boil, into a kettle, what would you recommend to do there? I mean, we use elements, we use propane.
Don't boil like a madman. You know, the wort does not need to leap out of the kettle. It just needs to.
I'm trying to expel the demons, damn it.
Yeah, that's the simplest thing is it doesn't have to be, and a lot of homebrew equipment doesn't have a thermometer on the mash tun, on the kettle, because the idea is, you see it boil, it boils. And homebrewers could easily create your own boil schedule like we do, where, you boil at 212 for a while early on, then you drop to 205, and then you would take it back up for the last 30 minutes. The other thing is you don't need to do a 90-minute boil either. 75 minute, 60 minute will typically do you just fine. And that's another way to reduce this. Also keep in mind, if you're making IPAs and you're drinking them really fast, you don't have to worry about this anyways. So, some of this stuff is just, the progression of me as a brewer. I started out as a home brewer, then I started Blind Pig, where we had some pretty cob equipment, and then, just my standards get higher and higher, and I expect more from our beer. I expect more from our team who makes the beer. I expect more from our lab team to be able to, test this stuff and quantify it. As the craft beer world has become more competitive, what can we do to have more shelf-stable beer? The flip side to that is I got a text from a buddy in Southern California who has a brewery who's ordering beer from our distributor down there and selling it in growlers right now. And he just got a keg of Pliny that was 4 days old from our distributor. Like for the fact that it's 500, 600 miles away, and he got he's tapping a keg of Pliny today that was just kegged here 4 days ago. That's pretty freaking cool that we're able to do that.
Hey, look, I'm rocking a bottle from 2015, so
I hope you're not drinking that.
No, it's just one of those bottles I keep in my garage just to kind of like overlook my brewing operation. So,
We would accept.
So Vinnie,
I assume that bottle is experiencing a little bit of that hop creep.
At this point, it's like a barley wine and saison. I mean, I probably got some like nasty bugs in there since it's been open for a while. So might just see what happens.
Well, all beer aside, Vinny, you're worth 1.5 liters of my 12-day-old Keller beer.
Nice. I love Keller beer. That's how we do STS.
So back to your German system real quick. This
Yeah.
conversation came up last week, and I figured I might as well beat it to death with every single person we talk to. Low dissolved oxygen on the hot side or hot side aeration. Where do you stand on hot side aeration?
I was always a student of George Fix, and he always was kind of all over the place on this. So to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure on the technical side, but I live by the notion of it can't hurt. And so we do everything we can, even on the hot side. One of the things I like about the wet mill is that you don't have the traditional system where it drops in the top of the mash tun. It's a pump that pumps the mash down into our basement and then up into the bottom of the mash tun. So we start there and try to do the best we can.
So you actually do underletting, basically.
The flip side to that is that our hop back, because we use all whole cone hops in the Whirlpool now, the way that works is if you think of a lauter tun, if you guys want to see what our hop back looks like, it's the exact same one that's at Karbach. It's just ours is a little smaller than Karbach's, but basically it's like a lauter tun, but with screens on the side. So we load it with hops, 100, I think Karbach's holds 200 pounds of hops, and then hot wort flows over the top, and then it exits through the screens on the side. And then there's a slide gate on the bottom so you can discharge the spent hops after. So we are seeing some hot side aeration there, and we're not having any issues. And that's why I'm not 100% sold on it, but I don't know the technical side of it. And I just figure that it can't hurt to be as gentle as possible on the, once we get past aerating the wort, our beers never touch a pump and until it has to be pumped to the bottling line. At our old brewery, we never even needed a pump there. So the idea was that we would always just push with CO2, and the pumps where we do have to move beer, we change those seals out every 6 months, if not sooner, just to make sure. And we always will end up with 0 parts per billion dissolved oxygen in our bright beer tank. And then we strive for, in the bottle, can, or keg, to be 20 for, well, not cans, because cans are inherently always higher in total package oxygen. But in bottles, we average about 20 or 25 parts per billion total package oxygen. And then in the cans, we're at like 30 to 40, which isn't bad. All things considered, 50 is pretty common also. But for our bottles, if we get over 30 parts per billion of oxygen in the bottle, we'll go back and immediately pull a bottle from that same head, do another test. If it's still high, we'll shut the whole line down and figure out what's going on.
I think the difference here is coming down to technology. In the good old days, 20 years ago, hot side aeration where you would get, oxidation, was an issue. Nowadays, with the system you have, the system Jamil has, the technology has made these sort of things less relevant. So, the talk is still there, but I think that, and it's a poor craftsman that blames his equipment for the quality of his beer. But you have to admit, technology has really stepped up, the quality of what we can deliver in a product if you're paying attention.
Even on a homebrew scale, that's the same thing. Like, you can be a pretty bad brewer and today with things like the Grainfather that just monitors everything for you, and you can still make a decent beer as long as you don't mess up fermentation.
Don't you have 3 Grainfathers in your house right now?
I've only got yours. Kinsey took his back, but I still have a bigger system I use too. So shut up. No, I only have yours.
I gotta jump in and say, it's all about the fermentation. You can, all these other things that we talk about. Yes, when you are, when you're making great beer and you're winning all these awards and you're top of the heap, Then, like Vinnie, you realize it's like, well, wait a minute, top of the heat, but I think this could be even better. This could be the best beer in the world. This could be perfect. This could be flawless. And you're, obsessive over trying to figure out what those last little things are. And maybe it's, the heat load from, kilning to the mash to the boil. Maybe it's, it's hot side aeration. Maybe it's, biotransformation. It's all these tiny little things that really people are making some fantastic, awesome beer, home brewers, professional brewers, and they're not worrying about any of that. All they worry about is fermentation. Fermentation real estate may be location. Beer brewing is fermentation. But, so focus on that first. Don't worry that you don't have a conical fermenter, that, how much heat you're putting on the kettle. All that stuff, it's minor until you've mastered the fermentation and sanitation.
Yeah.
That's the critical part.
Yeah, and getting your yeast health in order is critical. I mean, it's one of the reasons why dry yeast is good. And if you're not using, a yeast nutrient, I would highly advise it. Cervomyces is basically zinc and some dead yeast cells, basically. We use just zinc, and we're talking about, in a 75 barrel batch, it's grams. It's a tiny, tiny amount. What I just did was on part of my presentation. We're adding, for a 75 barrel batch, we're adding 7 grams of zinc.
Do you add that to the kettle or do you add that to the fermenter?
We're adding, that is on the hot side, and we are working towards adding it on the cold side, injecting it. But right now it's still on the hot side, and a lot of that will get bound up in the hops. And so you have to be careful there. And that's why we want to get it where we're adding it to the cold side, but we haven't gotten there yet. We wanted to hone it in on the hot side. But yeast health, yeast nutrient, and wort aeration, critical to yeast health, to follow up on what Jamil was saying. I mean, even when we have a little more beer system, so we take 20 gallons to the kettle, and then whatever we take to the fermenter, and then net in the end. And we still brew on it quite a bit, just testing yeast and hop varieties and stuff. And Zach, our lead brewer in Windsor, will lead a brew for our non-brewing team here, and usually does that quarterly, and then that beer ends up in sensory and everyone can enjoy it. So it's kind of cool. But even there, we aerate with oxygen. So we have a bottle of oxygen, just like we would if we were making a big batch. We've got a wand from more beer, wherever it came from, and it's got the tiny perforations on the end with the stone. And we've figured out how long it takes to get about 15 to 20 parts per million oxygen, even in our home brews. And I believe it's like 4 PSI for 5 minutes, or 5 minutes for 4 PSI. It's somewhere in there. Will give us somewhere 15 to 20 parts per million in our, 18 or 17 gallons of wort or whatever it is. And we use our high DO meter, which measures in parts per million, not parts per billion, to test this. And so we even drill down to be that detailed on our home brews. And as a homebrew club, I would recommend all of you going in together. I don't know how many people are in your club, but a decent DO meter that measured in parts per million is about $350, $400. It's not a huge amount of money in the big picture, and it's something you guys could share. And
the cost of our crawfish boil this year, since we're not having that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see, because the one thing that gets overlooked, especially if you're making IPAs, is that if you're adding too much oxygen, you're now generating a lot more yeast. If you're generating too much yeast, that yeast is now absorbing a lot of those hop oils and isomerized alpha acids, and you could be stripping your beer of bitterness, hop flavor, hop aroma by making too much yeast. I mean, the same thing could happen if you overpitch as well. And so having a grasp on your wort aeration is something to not overlook, you know. And I remember as a young home brewer just saying, you know, thinking the American way, if a little is good, a lot's better. And just saying, well, you know, I'll just add all the yeast in, you know, or I started cereal pitching, and I would, you know, figure out that maybe I needed, I don't know, a liter of yeast, and be like, well, I'll just add 2 liters just to be safe. And then, you know, I started learning more and studying more and going, ooh, maybe I'm doing a disservice to my beers. And then you start thinking about it from an IPA, and you now are starting to affect the consistency of your IPA and the flavor profile. And hops aren't cheap anymore. So, you know, you want to try to retain as much of that flavor as possible.
Yeah, yeast pitching rates, you know, fermentation temperatures, the nutrients. You know, if all you guys want to do zinc additions, which I highly recommend, especially if you're repitching your yeast. Vinnie, it sounds like you're using monohydrate if you're doing 7 grams per 7 barrels. Yeah. There's monohydrate, there's heptahydrate. You obviously use more of one than the other because one has more water molecules to it. But I would be willing to send you guys a kilo of
that'd be enough
plastic around it, and nobody ever would stop some white powder coming through the mail that looks like I actually put one in my luggage one time to take it to Sweden, and I put a note in with it saying, this is you know, a zinc monohydrate, it's for brewing, and I tell you, they opened it up, they clearly sampled it, they put it back in. I think I would have been in a room, you know, being stripped down and exposed if I did not put that note in there. But anyways, I could send one out to the club, and you guys could like share it among you. Need, okay, so Vinnie's using 7 grams in 75 barrels. You guys are going to need a tiny fraction. So what you do is you dissolve it in some water, and then you dose it with, you know, by milliliter. And you take a couple of grams, put it in a liter of water. And you guys, I did this for Quaff in San Diego. And like 1 kilo will last all you folks for many, many years. But it's important to have an appropriate zinc, especially if you're doing high gravity brews. If you see your high gravity beers,
look at that. James has some.
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I actually bought this, and I was like, I'll figure out a way to use it, but I don't think I'll ever use it all. So this will definitely be up for the club if anyone wants some.
Oh, there you
go.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, we're talking at like 0.2 parts per million.
Yeah.
Tiny amounts. You don't want to add too much.
Yeah.
You can
kill your yeast.
You can contaminate your yeast.
But if anyone in the club wants some, I've got some, so let me know, and I can
that's
snag
good.
you off some fresh stuff.
So what happens if you have a zinc deficiency? What's the impact?
You have sluggish fermentations, and like Jamil was saying, if you're serial pitching, you're repitching from batch to batch, it just starts compounding itself from the 2nd to the 3rd to the 4th generation of the yeast. But we, even on 1st generation, we use it, and we add. I don't hold me to this, but I believe we add even a little bit more when we're growing yeast on our yeast propagation system.
Even on especially bigger beers, if you've got a higher gravity beer and you see it just very slowly chugging on to the end and barely finishing out and reaching the attenuation you expected, that's almost always a zinc deficiency because people know to pitch enough yeast now. So what I found is by making sure my zinc was in order, you know, those things just plod on through and complete in a normal fashion versus all of a sudden just kind of petering out towards the end.
Hey, James, Jana's going to brew her MiG-28, 12% Riz pretty soon. So
hit me up, man. So yeah, to be honest, the reason why I bought this is because I finally got a car with Bluetooth, and I've finally been able to listen to podcasts in the said car. And I've gone through like Brew Strong within like 6 months, like all 12 years or whatever it is. So yeah, I heard the zinc thing, and I actually went on Amazon and found
good
big old
good
thing of
for you,
zinc. So
James.
Nice.
That's
I want to know.
that goes a long ways. And yeah, when you're brewing, whoever said this, brewing that bigger beer, you definitely want to get probably up to like 20 parts per million oxygen, which you can't measure unless you have a DO meter.
How do you suppose those customs agents felt when they railed a line of that stuff at the airport?
fucking Daryl.
No.
Well,
Yeah, I need to shoot off in about 5 minutes. I'm cooking dinner for Natalie tonight. So, but if there's anything else here, I'd be happy to come back another day as well.
I used to use for plenty.
For you before you go, and that is, how do you plan to attack put the zinc in on the coal side? What would that look like?
We took so my plant manager James is a pretty good welder, so it's nice to have a welder on staff. So we drilled a hole into the stainless pipe on the back side of the wort cooler, so it's in our yeast room. Mm-hmm. We welded in some sort of ferrule or union there, and then we'll have a peristaltic pump and do exactly what Jamil said. We'll dissolve the zinc in water, and we have deaerated water. So we have a system that strips the free oxygen out of water, and that feeds into that room, and it feeds there so that we can what we call trim water. So if we want a high gravity brew on the hot side, let's say we often do this with STS with our lagers. We'll stop running off early, so we'll high gravity brew in the kettle. So maybe STS is 11.7 Plato starting gravity, and we'll brew it at like 13 Plato, and then we'll trim it down with deaerated water. Well, we'll take some of that deaerated water and mix it with the zinc in a sterile container, and we've got this peristaltic pump that'll pump it in, and it'll do it. And the nice thing about a peristaltic pump is that let's say our knockout is 40 minutes. We can run it over 35 minutes, and it's just putting in a small dose over that 35-minute period instead of just putting it all in at once. But that's how we do it on the cold side. The trick, though, is how do you test it on the cold side? Because we typically pit yeast in line from a yeast brink, and once the yeast is in contact, it's instantly taking up the zinc. And so it's really hard to get a true test on the cold side of what your zinc level is. Whereas on the hot side, if we add it into the kettle, and then the wort pumps to the whirlpool and it gets mixed up there, and then it's being pumped through the wort cooler, we can grab a sample at some sample point. Super easy to get a reading there. And that's one of the reasons why we actually haven't switched to the cold side. You'll hear all day long from professional brewers that adding zinc on the cold side is more efficient. At the same time, when you're only adding
7 grams,
7 grams isn't much.
costs you nothing.
Zinc's not that expensive.
It doesn't even show up in tests. How do you even test for that in 2,100 gallons?
What's also interesting is that you need to make sure that your vials that you're pulling from are specific vials that won't uptake metals. And we learned that the hard way. And if any of you want to go back and listen to that panel I was on for the virtual CBC earlier in the week, Max from I think it was Max, maybe it was Adam from Creature Comforts talks about this, how the first time they did the test, they're like, oh shit, we don't have any zinc. And it turned out they were using vials that were just absorbing the metal. So, but yeah, so anyways, that's how we will add it on the cold side, but we're not sure how we're going to test it unless we do some batches where we don't add the yeast until the fermenter and we push it in after the fact, which is probably what we'll do. But even then, we need to make sure we homogenize the tank and make sure that it all got added in a homogeneous fashion and that it can be mixed properly.
Vinny, before you go, let me throw you a banal softball, just D-League softball question. What's your daily drinker and what do you appreciate about it?
The beer that I drink daily?
Just your go-to.
For our beers right now, it's Velvet Glow, our Helles, and the Yanami that I was just drinking. For non-Russian River beer, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. It's still in my fridge almost all the time. I think I'm going to be on the Sierra Nevada's doing a Zoom or something weekly tasting now on Thursdays. I think I'm going to be on it next week with them. So I need to go out and refresh my Sierra Nevada Pale Ale stock because I know I just drank the last one out of my fridge a couple days ago.
Well, you see, you just made yourself old school. You're old school. All those old school guys love that Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, man.
Yeah.
We die for fresh Sierra Nevada Pale Ale out here in Houston, though. Like, our distributor puts it on the shelf, and it's on the shelf 4 months old. But,
right.
I mean, I will say, and I've been saying this for a few weeks now since it came to Houston, the El Segundo Stone Cold Steve Austin IPA, if I could close my eyes and blind test them, it's a fresh Sierra Nevada torpedo.
Nice.
It really is. And that's a good thing. That's an extreme compliment. A beer with a wrestler's name on it should not be that good. And I'm a wrestling fan. I know it shouldn't exist. It just is what it is.
Oh, really? You're a wrestling fan? I wouldn't have guessed.
No, see, I just brought some backup today because we're going to have another discussion about how USO5 is the greatest yeast on the planet. And I just happen to have a couple of experts with me to help beat it into your thick heads.
Oh, Lord.
Absolutely.
If
But
you
anyway,
like that peach
I think
ester.
Vinny needs to go. We don't want to upset Natalie too much.
Yeah.
Hey,
Vinny,
time
one
out.
last one to go. Yeast for Planet the Elder and Younger, are they the same yeast? And if so,
Yeah.
what yeast?
Both are the same yeast, and it's just California ale yeast from White Labs, and
WLP001.
well known, or maybe it is a pretty well-known story that I used to buy yeast from Chris before White Labs existed, and
You had a yeast dealer, huh?
he was getting he was doing his master's or whatever in like DNA toxicology or something that's way above my head. That's not what it was, and this was at UCSD in La Jolla in San Diego. And I would call him a couple weeks ahead and say, hey, I need some yeast. And he would grow it up. And at the time he was making yeast for Homebrew Mart, which eventually became Ballast Point, and then the original Pizza Port in Solana Beach. So I was Chris's third customer before White Labs existed.
Wow.
And I would drive to La Jolla. There was a mobile gas station at the bottom of the hill. It was before cell phones. I would go in and use the payphone, call up to the lab. He would come out with a brown bag. I'm sure it looked like a drug deal from afar. And we were both too busy to even stop and talk and catch up that I would give him the money. He would give me the brown bag and I would drive back to Temecula. So I've been using that yeast for a while. And we tried other versions of it, but we just find that it flocks the way that we like. And like we've tried, the same yeast from other yeast suppliers, and there are some small differences. And so for us to, 001 from
Stick with what you know, right?
Yeah, and it works really well. But same yeast for both elder and younger.
Awesome.
Say hello to Natalie.
I will. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Nice to catch up with a lot of great homebrewers. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Vinny.
Thank you, Vinny.
Very much. Thank you.
Yeah,
Hey, you scored 2 liters, man.
This was awesome.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
Maybe if you want to come again, if we didn't bother you too much or bore you too much, maybe you can bring Ken along.
Yeah, you'll have to reach out to Ken. I'm not his. So
Well, it was good to see you too, man.
I would love to do this again sometime. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Maybe we can do a virtual brewery tour of yours.
Yeah, maybe we can. I just got hit up from UC Davis to do that. I got to figure out how to do that, but we'll see what we can do.
Once you do it, let us know.
All right, good.
Right.
Take
Thanks
care.
for coming on, Vinny.
See you, brother.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Right.
All right, now that Vinny's bounced, I would like to go ahead and introduce Jamil to James Wolf, Huggy Bear. You actually judged one of James's beers several years ago at Dixie.
Oh, snap.
Hey, Jamil, how's it going?
Is that why he's flipping me off? What? Why am I seeing his junk in the video? Why am I seeing nothing else?
Wait, that's my signature shot. Let me get
Lord.
No!
Berlin's drunk again.
Joshua Berlin.
Hey, I'm only on my 3rd liter of Keller beer.
No,
It's
God.
cooler beer, man. You should be able to drink 5 liters of it.
Is
That
the
was-
trash gone?
So, Wolf, what was the score on that score sheet that Jamil gave you?
Yeah. I think
Hold on.
Jamil might remember.
Hold on 1 second. You gotta see Travis and Travis Jr. there. Looking pretty awesome.
Oh, hey. Thank you. Nice.
Yeah,
Rocking the buggies.
Wow.
All right.
I was pretty impressed with the number of steps you got in during the first hour or so of this call.
10, 20. Hey, give me 1 moment to go get another beer. This is when I mute and turn my video off. I'm getting another beer.
Well, it's time for me to cook dinner, so I'm
Yeah,
off, gentlemen. Jamil, it was great seeing you, man. He's gone. There he goes.
He gone.
But you guys, I'm glad to, we'll do this again. I'm glad I had time to join you guys. You guys.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, Foss. It's always great to see you, man.
You guys do good fun. Javier,
We try to have fun.
You're cooking.
Javier, I was drinking that lime
Mead.
that you made at the meeting there. Tasted pretty damn good.
Nice.
Which one? The one that was made with Tracy's recipe?
The key lime.
Oh, it's good to drink now, or?
Oh, TC forgot to mute it.
It is.
Hopefully we can try it soon enough.
Well, it's sitting at the shop. I just brought home a growler of it. You know, it's been there for a couple of months, and so I just wanted to try it. And a little sweet for me, but it's very tasty.
Well, it is for the club, and you're a club member, so have as much of it as you want.
But save some for me.
Oh no, there's plenty there. I just brought home 32 ounces of it. Well, maybe 64.
All right, I'm back. How horrible was I to James on his score sheet?
Oh.
No, you gave me that was a 50-point beer, Jamil. That stays on?
It was a 50-point, but did I give you a 50-point?
Yeah, you said it was. You said it was a 50-point. You were on which podcast? I can't remember, but you were talking about the beer.
Oh, there you go. What did I give you on the score sheet? 50?
I don't remember actually. I have to go back and look.
I wouldn't say it's a 50 on the air if it wasn't a 50 on the score sheet. Or was it? Or did I just meet you in person and I loved you so much that I believed it was a 50?
Have you ever given a 50?
Yeah.
I've given probably 6 or 8 or maybe as many as 10. I think we talked about this before. Yeah, I've given 50s because I believe that, you know, the thing about judging is not to, you know, go into it going like, well, what's wrong with this beer? What's wrong with this beer? What's wrong with this beer? And, you know, it's just like, okay, so every beer has got problems. It's like, well, you know, if you're having to hunt and pick and, you know, and dream up things why the beer is not great, you know, maybe the beer is great. Maybe it is possible to brew a fantastic, perfect beer. I think that that's very possible. And, you know, it's not on us to just go like, well, how can I make this thing, you know, denigrate this thing with, you know, how can I dig and scrape to, make problems that the brewer is going to just worry over? And that's why you didn't get a 50, because, this, that, the other thing, and you're at a 46. You're at a 48.
I was menstruating that day.
Stupid. Absolutely stupid. If it tastes great, if it's truly a great beer and you don't see some sort of, or taste some sort of some flaws in it, then it's perfect beer. It's okay to declare something perfect. Why is it, the person you love is perfect, right? Or, God bless you.
The person I love is not perfect.
Right? Your children are perfect.
Apparently Germans
Come
are
on, don't be so. Why do we have to find these imaginary flaws and things? Sure, things are rarely perfect, but every once in a while they are. You go through 3, 4, 5,000 beers. If you haven't found 5, 10, 20 perfect beers, then what kind of beer are you drinking? In the same respect, you should find, at least the same amount of beers that are probably deserve a 0, but, guidelines tell you should, be around 13 or whatever. But
yeah, it's like the SAT. If you can fill out the form,
just be honest. Be 100% honest with yourself and with the brewer, and just say, you know what? I think this is perfect. I couldn't brew better. I don't think, there's a better, example right now in front of me. I think it's perfect. And go ahead and give them a 50. Don't make some imaginary reason why it's a 48. That's just stupid. I've gotten 49s. It's like, well, I don't know why, but I'm giving you a 49 instead of a 50.
That's probably me. I'm the 49 guy. I am. I have to admit it.
Right.
I'm the 49 guy. What can I say?
I love you, and you're the problem. You're the problem.
I agree with everything you say, but I'm just, it's like, I think I've been waiting all my life for that beer where it's like, this is a damn 50. And I'm not sure I found that yet.
You have to just, let go. Be in love with the fact that we get to experience beer. And I think beer today is the greatest beer has ever been.
This is true.
I don't doubt that, beer has been fantastic across the millennia, but today the selection, the quality, the innovation is amazing. And we should just be, happy with that. I do believe there's a real problem with people, like some little brewery opens up and it's like, oh, this guy's cool and the place looks good and they're good on social media and it's a small brewery and it's local. And so, I can't say anything bad about that beer. Their beer is perfect. It's always 5 stars. And it's just like, oh my God, they don't know how to brew beer. And it's horrible crap, but people are just, they're all in on it because nobody can say that, a small local brewery is bad.
Well, I think that we all know that there's a lot of bad beer out there.
Well, nobody can say a big brewery is good. While I hate the corporate types at some of these big breweries like Anheuser-Busch or Coors or whatever, you got to give it to them. The bulk of what they're brewing is pretty freaking exactly spot on and has no problems. When they try and do craft beer, it sucks because they're worried about the money and the marketing. And, the marketing people are like, well, no, nobody wants something with flavor. We're limiting our market by adding flavor to this beer.
Making a technically good beer doesn't mean it's necessarily a good beer.
Right.
One of my favorite beer experiences of my whole life. I know I am the guy in the club that will sometimes defend commercial beer, even though I do spend
Drink more
80% of my money on craft beer. But one of the coolest things I've ever had in my life that was amazing, and it kind of ties into what Jamil said, is I went to an Astros game about 5 or 6 years ago, and they did 0-day Budweiser. They pumped it out of the tanks and had 0-day kegs available at the stadium. That was a very good beer. I mean, for what it is. I mean, if Budweiser's not your thing, it's not your thing. But
if you weren't ranting how good Keystone was earlier, I think
that's my house wine. It is what it is.
Does anyone here believe that Daryl only spends 20% of his beer money on Keystone Light?
Have you seen how much Keystone Light costs?
Yeah, Keystone is 5% of the cost, so
it's 80% of
We're
the
not
volume.
in college anymore, Daryl.
You also remember he actually recycles the cans, so he gets like most of his money back.
I drink more St. Arnold Art Car than any other beer on the planet. Keystone is my gimmick. It's not my
That is a lie.
80%
That is
drink.
a bald-faced lie.
Okay.
I'm so cheap I don't even buy Keystone.
One of the tastiest beers, or one of the perfect beers I've ever had, which is very bizarre because I'm not a real fan, but it came off the end of the 100-foot filter at Coors. It was a banquet beer, and I got to tell you, it tasted perfect. I was amazed at how good and refreshing that beer was after it came right out of the filter.
I'll bet that's similar to how I felt after the 0-day Budweiser. It was tremendous.
I don't think anyone's ever said that they make bad beer. It's just they don't make a beer that tastes like anything other than slightly more watery water. Like,
well,
it's technically good.
Knowing a lot of the brewers at Budweiser in Fairfield, they could make something great.
Absolutely.
They have the knowledge, they have the budget, the ingredients. They could do whatever they want. However, there's a corporate structure. There's marketing is far more in control of Budweiser, and corporate's far more in control of Budweiser than the brewers are. The brewers are low on the totem pole at Budweiser, which is a giant shame.
You make this goddamn widget now, and you make it right.
Exactly. And so when they did they did the Budweiser American Ale, they came out with something that actually tasted really good. Yeah. And then they presented that, and they were told, no, that's the wrong beer. You need to reduce the hop flavor, the malt flavor. No, that's, it's way too bold for what our customers want. And what the marketing people didn't realize is, the customers you already have them. They're drinking Bud Light, all them, whatever, Michelob, whatever it is. The reason to do this special beer was because, there's a whole other part of the market out there that you could have wowed, that you could have proven to them, you're talented, you can brew it. In Fairfield, they started brewing 10-barrel beers out of Oregon. They're brewing Goose Island. They're brewing, what are the others? And, it's brewed there, but they're told to dumb it down every time. They're just like, well, how are you cutting costs? How are you, they could brew something fantastic. They are limited on what they can do a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Not the brewer's fault. It's the accountants, it's the marketing people, it's the corporate people. The brewers are talented, smart, professional brewers that really know a lot and have access to a lot of talent. And it's just frustrating. It's just
also they work basically in a plant that we've programmed this to make this exact beer. Trying to retrofit that to make an IPA or something is probably gonna be a lot of programming on the back end, stuff like that.
Well, not even just programming. I was there at the Fairfield plant, and they had to, kind of weld in a pipe.
It's a complete undertaking just to tweak one little thing.
Right. It's very homebrew-esque at, this giant volume. when the brewers are involved. The brewers are great people. All the people that work there at the plant, fantastic.
Well, like Mitch Steele, he came from Budweiser, right?
What?
Mitch Steele, he came from Anheuser-Busch, right?
Yes.
Mitch.
What?
Mitch, that was at Stone and is now at in Atlanta.
New Realm. Yeah,
New Realm. He came from Budweiser, right?
The people that brew, they're passionate brewers. They're good people. They love beer and brewing and all that stuff. And they've either gone to school or they have a lot of experience and they have a lot of science behind them. They have a lot of knowledge. The problem is, it'd be like you at your work when, they tell you, you come up with some great idea or you want to make things better and, you want to be, what the market needs today. And then they tell you, it's like, well, no, people want, what they wanted 30 years ago. And, you're going to cost us 2 cents more per widget that, we understand you could charge $1 more, but, it's going to be 2 cents more. They're just so stuck in protecting their jobs, a lot of these people, that they can't. One of the things about craft beer and craft brewers is people have left cushy jobs like I did and gone into something that is just the stupidest thing you ever done in your life. You are risking everything you have for something that, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it really matters. But I'm passionate about, the quality of beer and what we do, and I'm just going to do it. I hope to God that other people understand that and will support that. Whereas when you're in a big corporation, a lot of these really big breweries that are making millions of barrels per year, they're just looking at it, it's like, hey, we got to this point. We're not going to risk this thing. And that's what kills them in the long run. They are, all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're not going to change. This is the beer that got us here. This is the beer that, this is our formula. Don't, all you guys that are talking and telling us, oh, you're thinking about this and the other thing. No. You guys, screw you. Don't upset the boat. That's the problem. Whereas, you guys are right. When you speak up and change things. Where'd Michael go? I think he was going to talk. He's
Same
gone.
thing in oil and gas, man. We're having the same kind of problem. I have like an innovative program that I'm trying to get the guys to embrace so that they could be better and more efficient, but it's not what they know, so they don't want to go.
Well, you wearing that hat and drinking all that beer. Once you're 3 liters in and wearing the hat, they don't want to listen to you. That's the problem.
Exactly.
One of the good examples that kind of compares to the commercial breweries where it's kind of about adapting styles. If a commercial brewery wanted to make an IPA, like a big one like Budweiser, they really could. They've got all the buying power. They could make it cheaper than anybody else, but they don't because they know what their market is.
Right.
A really good example of a brewer that's local that Jamil might not be too familiar with him, although he's probably heard the name. Chad knows him for sure. Brock Wagner hates IPAs. The owner of St. Arnold. But then Art Carr, when his brewers sat him down and said, we're going to make an IPA that's not, we don't say Alyssa's name out loud. It's like Voldemort, that beer that shall not be named. And now Art Carr is one of St. Arnold's most successful beers. And they had to break out of the mold and do something a little bit different. And now it's, they release it in both bottles, and it's the only beer that they release in both bottles and cans because they can, and it shoots all over the market everywhere. And
bottles and 16-ounce cans too. So,
I made my point. I don't know what else I was going to say about that, but it is. It's just there's examples of that on the craft side just as much as there are on the commercial side.
I agree. Stupidity, I'm stupid. I make all sorts of mistakes. you know, everybody, when you have everything on the line, like I do, it's like, well, you know, I'm hesitant to take risks. You know, I mean, I've taken some risks, but then I also think, oh man, you know, we need to do what, you know, got us here. You know, it's very difficult. You know, if you risk everything that you own, and that, you know, I'm on the hook for everything that we own. My wife and I, she's 60, I'm 59. We don't have a lot of other time to make up if I fuck up on this thing. So it's scary.
Have you seen any kind of uptick in the sales in the last week or so since the last time we talked, as far as like some other countries possibly opening up a little bit more and possibly an influx of product coming in?
This week I've seen orders coming in from Thailand and Taiwan that they had shut down, but now they're asking for beer. So,
I mean, Texas wants beer, but we're just not going to talk about that.
can we get a goddamn distributor in Texas? I'm just saying, you know, I contacted folks, but they, you know, they were like, oh no, you're not ready for Texas. Hey.
Maybe next week we'll have some distributors on that we can talk to. I think Chad's on. Chad, why don't you get on that? You know people in the beer industry.
Otherwise, all the beer needs to go through Travis, and Travis is instructed to charge you guys all up the yin yang for, you know, any beers you might get.
Hey, I give them RO for your beer, so.
What I've just picked up is that he's willing to do it, but no one's made him the offer that he can't refuse.
Yes. There you go.
I think there's also the part of the where Texas actually charge you like $5,000 just to distribute here. Is that what I've heard properly?
Yeah. I think it's a total of 10. It's like you got to register the first 2 or something like that. I don't know what it is, but yeah, it's just no. We you know, ship some samples to somebody. I don't know. We're killing it everywhere we go, and I mean, people are like, well, it's not California, it's not your backyard. It's like, well, Massachusetts is holy living, ripping the hell out of all our beer. Everywhere we go, it's doing really well because people like you that are passionate about beer, you heard about us, you know us, you're willing to give it a try, and then if it's good, you'll keep drinking it or you recommend it to other people.
It's good
Maine Beer Company just started this week. Yeah, like this week they just showed up, so went and picked some up. I've actually got some waiting here for Travis to get.
Is that my bottle? Is that my bottle, James?
Get that microphone out of your mouth.
Put it in the refrigerator.
Put that microphone 2 more inches away from your mouth.
What?
I don't know. Like, fuck you.
That thing is inducting directly from your brain.
I'm with Daryl in this one, guys. I'm with Daryl. Daryl and I agree.
I gotta go. But
I agree with Daryl, but Erlenmeyers are even illegal here.
a couple of things I want to talk about before I go, because I didn't get a chance to say them earlier, is the thing you're looking for in the hazies is proline. You want proline heavy. You don't want just proteins. You want a proline heavy malt. I know a lot of you don't care about the hazies, but if you're trying to make one, it's the prolines. Wheat has a higher proline level than any of the other grains. Spelt is one of the ways to go if you can't get the high proline protein wheats that are out there. The other thing is, JC, he was on, with us a week or 2 ago. I don't know. I'm on every week now.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. You should do this make it a normal thing. Just it's your Friday thing.
I have to do my actual homebrew club, which I haven't done yet.
We're more fun. I'm sorry.
I feel bad.
You're an official.
We're better. I'm sorry.
We need you to pay your $35 dues. You're one of us now.
We might be able to buy you like a Southwest ticket for like
$35.
Actually, true. You could come visit us for cheaper than our membership dues.
Let you into the crawfish boil for free next year.
So JC, he's saying that he also does not, dry hop during fermentation. He waits to the very end or close to the end, right? Not till everything's still and done, but as things are slowing down, that's the time to dry hop.
So what day would you call that? Like day 5, day 6? That way the yeast can still scrub some of the oxygen that's introduced with the.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, yeast will take up oxygen like you wouldn't believe.
I'm not sure if you actually cool it down to 50 some odd degrees to dry hop to start crashing at that point, if that's going to affect.
Fermentation temperature. As things look like they're slowing, you throw it in then.
Okay.
When it's slower.
Wish Kinsey would have heard that because he was asking me about that this week. I was like, dude, you've never dry hopped before? Like, come on, man.
Right. But I'll tell you, JC at Trillium, they make some of the best New England IPAs I've ever had. They're really good.
Did y'all see who just joined the call?
No. Who joined?
Hey, Stubby, how's it going?
Good old Stubby.
Hey, Jamil, if you come to the crawfish boil, don't get your hopes up on the funnel cake.
Oh, Lord. We don't have to go over that.
I think Eric already left. We can't beat up Eric when he already hit the road.
That was me. I was supposed to make
Harold's still
there. Well, maybe we can.
All right, my brothers.
Maybe we can get Stubby now to do the funnel cakes.
All right, brothers. I gotta go.
Yeah, thanks, Jamil.
Love you all.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
There we go.
See you next week.
Thanks for the tic-tac-toe 3 weeks in a row.
But it's good timing. Now we've got another homebrew figure that we can beat up on. Hey, Stubby. How's it going?
Take care.
I'm just drinking whiskey, so fuck all that beer stuff.
So I am ready for part 3 of my 3-week series about how US05 is the best yeast on the planet.
I'm not that bad, but I gotta go take a piss. This is 3 days.
Take a piss. I want you to know that just in this last week, I have discovered that you can rub a brisket with salt, pepper, and US05, and that shit is delicious.
Well, I've heard everything now, man. I heard something today. Had a guy call me and he goes, "Hey, you have a brewer's yeast?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "I need a pound of it." And I'm like, "Well, what kind do you need?" And he goes, "Oh, I just need brewer's yeast. It's for my dogs for flea control." And I'm like, "Okay, that's a new one. I've never heard that one before."
So they sell that dead brewer's yeast on the health food aisle. I guess he just didn't realize and get that for like $6 at HEB. And if you didn't sell that to him for $50, sir, you'd have had like $30 in profit.
He sold him US05.
That's good shit. See, y'all, I'm tired of this.
Perfect for dog feed.
You say they say that all yeast is created equal, but you look at liquid yeast and you look at USO5 and you just know that statement is not true. You see, normally, you need a liquid yeast from Farm Boy, you got a 50-50 chance of it being in stock. But this is the era of COVID, and that shit's not normal. So you got a 25% chance at best at getting the liquid yeast that you need. Then you add Best Buy dates to the mix, and your chance of getting a viable pack of liquid yeast drastically go down. See, you got a 33 1/3% chance of getting what you want. But since I use USO5, I got a 66 2/3 chance of getting what I want. And a lot of you know the Farm Boy isn't even open. So you're not even going to try. So you take the 33 1/3 chance minus my 25% chance. You got an 8 1/3 chance of brewing with liquid yeast. 75% chance of getting USO5. You add your 66 2/3%.
That's not how any of this works.
Chance to brew my beer with US.
I muted him.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got to jump in here. Dude, Daryl's like Breaking Bad. You got the blue. You got the blue, man. I gotta have the blue.
It's 92% pure. The crackheads don't care about that last 8%.
That was at the end of my promo. I only had 2 sentences left. I'm just going to say the numbers don't lie. It's doomed.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, I will fully say that I'm glad we didn't get this silly when Vinnie was still on, because he'd be like, oh, Lord, these people are stupid.
Oh, no, I waited for... I pre-wrote that material, and I waited till every one of the special guests was gone.
What are y'all drinking? I've got me a, if you can see it, Sparkle Motion by Local Group.
Oh, you're starting with the Huggy Bear there. All right, that's good.
I'm actually giving Huggy some love, too. Blurry Eyes Nipa. I crushed the can, but...
This El Segundo Mayberry IPA, if you find it, is absolutely phenomenal. Old school West Coast IPA.
Look at there, man. I recommend shipping to Georgia as soon as possible.
I got some Ghost in the Machine tonight.
Nice.
She's trying out my newest Pilsner that I made.
Man, my entire
yin and yang,
fermentation
we're
chamber got
punch
turned
on
into deep freezing storage, so I haven't even been able to brew during this apocalypse. It just sucks. I just can't even brew. I guess I use my.
Don't hold up 2 beers at the same time unless you're going to drink 2 beers at the same time.
Yeah,
Everybody's been
one after
brewing,
the
man.
other.
What are y'all talking about?
Poncho and Lefty.
Everybody's been brewing.
Wait, what's
Homebrew
up?
stuff is ridiculous right now. Unbelievable. Supposedly, if you get any yeast right now, it's all like this month.
So Stubby, talk to us a little bit. What does Homebrew Shop's supply chain look like right now?
It depends. I think from the standpoint of, I don't know what this is going to do to people. We've been destroyed. I mean, it has been. I've never seen the orders that we've gotten. It's just ridiculous. I don't know if that's because people are just staying at home and brewing, or a lot of stores are closed and they don't have the ability to do e-commerce. Or
so you missed it. We had the AHA, the American Homebrewers Association, was on our first one of these meetings, and it was the best line of all these meetings we've had so far. When white people lose their jobs, all it goes through the roof.
Yeah.
We start fermenting, making bread, cinnamon rolls.
That was straight out of the demographic people's mouths.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it has to do too is people are at home. I don't think a lot of. I think a lot of. And if you look at the demographic of home brewers, I would say majority of them are probably most of them are well educated. I would say majority of them are engineers or computer software developers or something of that nature. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of these guys are probably staying at home and they're brewing while they're working. And then we've got a lot of these guys are what's happening for us at least. It seems like people are working at home, and while they're working, they're brewing. So it's and then you start looking at it from an economic standpoint. If you're worried about your job or you're worried about your paycheck, that $10 6-pack or that $20 4-pack of tall boys seems kind of a tall order. You know what I mean? When you can buy a 5-gallon batch worth of ingredients.
I am one of those people that's brewing while I'm working.
Sorry, Daryl. I need to get you your grandfather back. I can't even use it at the moment, so I need to get it back to you.
Is it damaged? You've had it for like 5 months now. Is it still in one piece?
It's still in one piece. Everything's there. It's still got the Home Depot bucket lid on it. It's fine.
But you didn't answer the question. Does it still work?
Yeah, it still works.
Are you sure?
I mean, it worked as like 2 months ago.
As well as it was when I first gave it to you. Let's not pretend like a grain father works well.
Hey, homebrew related question. Who all knew about this thermal load shit that fucking Jamil and Vinnie both harped on about past 2 weeks?
I've heard Jamil talk about it quite a bit on Brew Strong, but
thermal load of crap.
Talk about it, I'm like, okay, well, maybe there's something to this.
Thermal loading crap aside, Stubby.
Hold on.
Appreciate your Irish.
But we have a homebrewer. We have a well-known homebrewer in the room that said he has a counter argument. I want to hear the other side.
Thermal load of this double decoction? Is that what you're talking about?
My hose water beer beat a decoction beer from the most prominent decoction brewer in the homebrew club.
I don't care about that because this is a color beer and I'm on the 3rd liter, motherfucker.
That's what I'm talking about.
Soon he's only going to be wearing that hat. We know where this night's going.
No, hold
going
on.
in the right direction.
Stubby, you said that you thought that was a bunch of BS. Talk about it a little bit. I mean,
Decoction?
No, the thermal load on the boiling and.
I don't even know what the hell he's talking about, to be honest with you. So I don't know what thermal load is.
Really,
I have an opinion about decoction mash. If you want to hear that.
I think what they're talking about really may or may not matter at the commercial level. Like he's like a 75 barrel batch, like he's making in Windsor. I think maybe. I don't fucking know. I never heard of it.
Agreed.
It's kind of like
what they were saying was their steam generation system. You know, the higher the PSI, the hotter the steam that goes into the kettle.
Yeah.
Well, that makes
sense. If they had a higher pressure, it was overcooking their wort because it's like a burner being in the middle of their kettle being too hot.
Yeah.
So I've never heard
it's an instant pot. It's a gigantic instant pot. It's a pressure cooker.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that makes sense.
No, it is.
Matt, that makes sense because a lot of times I think people really that's one of the biggest problems people have with extract brewing is they overcook their wort. And when you do that, if you do that, you're caramelizing the sugar. Well, that makes your beer darker or makes your beer sweeter because of course you don't have any of when you're caramelizing your beer, you're making complex carbohydrates that your yeast can't ferment out. So that makes sense to me.
Hey, good.
It's just not talked about in any of the books that we read. What do you think, Huggy? I mean, do you worry about this?
I haven't heard about it before, but it seems to be something that until you're brewing the same exact beer over and over and over, and you got the profile locked down, then you can start looking at. It feels like it might be a small thing. I think. I don't know. I haven't heard of it.
5%.
So it's like hot side aeration.
We call it TBI, thiobarbituric acid index.
That you just spoke ancient tongue.
Like for us,
I don't know what pyramid wall you read that off of, but none of us have time for that.
Yeah, sanitation avoids butyric.
Yeah, I can say on.
You're saying on the homebrew scale, is it better to have like a soft boil versus a rolling boil?
I can tell you right now I have a 10-barrel system. I'm not worried about it right now. There's other things I'm worried about kind of perfecting and locking down first.
Yeah.
Good plan.
My standing rule for homebrew is that I want at least